Right now, someone far less capable than you is getting everything you've been too hesitant to claim. Not because they're better, but because they move like they belong. Speak like their words are law and act like the world owes them nothing, yet gives them everything. They don't wait for permission. They don't pause to make sure their voice is welcome. They walk in, speak up, take space, and the world, as it always does, rewards confidence before competence, certainty before truth. Meanwhile, you hesitate. You calculate. You wait for the perfect timing, the perfect wording, the perfect moment that never comes. And while you wait, someone else takes what could have been yours. Not because they earned it, but because they expected it. And this is the silent tragedy. No one warns you about that in this world. Power is not awarded to the brilliant, the kind, or the prepared. It's awarded to the convincing, to the man who radiates decisiveness, even if he doubts inside, to the man who walks like a storm, still measured and impossible to ignore. What you were told to be polite, agreeable, liked has quietly made you disposable. And what you avoided certainty, intensity, unapologetic presence is the very thing that would have made you undeniable. This is not motivation. This is exposure of every habit, every internal script, every invisible leash that's kept you small. And if you're still listening, then part of you already knows your life will not change through affirmation, but through execution of the version of you that keeps asking, waiting, shrinking. Because the truth is brutal, someone with less talent is ahead of you, because they made a decision not to be perfect, but to be feared. And until you do the same, you will keep losing to men who were never better, only bolder. You weren't born hesitant. You weren't born apologetic. You weren't born shrinking to fit into rooms too small for your potential. That version of you was manufactured, shaped, molded, and softened by a lifetime of quiet obedience. From the moment you could speak, you were taught to lower your voice. From the moment you could act, you were taught to ask first. Be polite. Be patient. Be liked. These weren't just lessons, they were chains, and you wore them well. But here's the truth no one dares to say aloud you've been groomed to be easy to manage. Not to lead, not to challenge, not to command, to make others comfortable even when it cost you your fire. And now you carry that invisible script inside your mind. You feel it every time you hesitate before speaking your truth, every time you downplay your desires, every time you feel the need to explain yourself just to feel allowed. That script is not your soul. It's not your conscience. It's your inner servant, and he is killing you softly. You look around and wonder why less intelligent, less principled men are ahead of you. It's not a mystery. They weren't better. They were bolder. They didn't wait to be chosen. They chose themselves. They didn't ask if they were ready. They acted as if readiness was irrelevant, and the world bent for them, because it always bends for those who move with conviction, even when that conviction is hollow. And you wait. You question. You rehearse your brilliance in silence while someone else sells mediocrity with confidence. And as much as it hurts to hear that pain is your signal you were not born to serve, but you've been living like a servant, if that makes your chest tighten good, it means part of you is still alive. Because deep down, under all the programming and all the fear, there is something fierce inside you. A ruler, a force, a man who's sick of asking, who's done explaining, who's ready to bury the version of himself that flinches at judgment and apologizes for wanting more. This chapter is not for comfort. It's for confrontation. You have to decide now, will you keep obeying the inner servant or will you kill him? Because until he dies, the real you will never breathe. And if you don't reclaim your voice, your presence, your certainty, someone else will continue to write your story and sign it with their name. Confidence isn't something you wait for. It's something you build, design, and enforce, especially when you don't feel ready. The world has fed you another lie that confidence comes after clarity, after comfort, after some magic moment where you finally feel worthy. But that's a fantasy designed to keep you quiet. Confidence doesn't come after action. It is born inside action, especially when it feels unnatural. The reason you still shrink is because you've tied confidence to comfort. You're waiting for the anxiety to vanish, the nerves to settle, the self-doubt to dissolve, before you act like the man you were meant to be. But that day won't come. Not because you're broken, but because that's not how power works. True confidence is counterintuitive. It's built through defiance, not reassurance. Every time you want to retreat, and instead you expand, you evolve. Every time you want to explain yourself, and instead you hold the silence, you shift the atmosphere. Every time you feel the urge to say sorry when no harm was done, and instead you stare back calmly, something inside you changes. Not just mentally, but physically. Biologically, you stop walking like prey. You stop sounding like a question. You stop breathing like someone who hopes to be allowed. Because confidence is not a mindset. It's not positive thinking. It's not shallow motivation. It's an identity, and identities are built through ritual, through pattern, through rebellion against your weakest instincts. And the truth is, the confident man you envy, the one who commands attention without begging for it, was not born like that. He built it through small daily acts of psychological war. He starved the version of himself that needed to be liked, and he fed the one that could move through a room like it already belonged to him. So here's your ritual. If it makes you small, kill it. A thought, a habit, a friend, a tone of voice. If it shrinks your posture or makes you second guess, it does not belong in the world you're building. You are not here to be nice. You are not here to be digestible. You are here to become precise, controlled, respected. The world will always tell you to soften, to apologize for being sharp, for being sure, for taking up space. But precision is not cruelty, and certainty is not arrogance. They're just rare because few men have the discipline to carry them. You do. You just haven't acted like it yet, until now. Because from this point forward, your confidence is no longer up for debate. It's the foundation you build your kingdom on. Powerful men are not loud. They are not frantic. They do not beg to be seen. Their presence is not a performance, it's a force. And that force begins the moment they enter a room without needing to prove anything. They don't rush. They don't scan for approval. They arrive like gravity. And gravity never asks for attention. It demands it simply by being there. Most people talk fast, move quickly, interrupt constantly, not because they're confident, but because they're nervous, desperate to be perceived as important, anxious to be validated. That energy reveals everything. It screams, "Please accept me." And in that need, they give away all their power. But the man who controls his tempo controls the room. His stillness unsettles. His silence provokes. His gaze says more than 100 desperate words ever could. He doesn't rush to speak because he knows something the others don't. The one who speaks last holds the power to reshape the conversation. He listens not to react, but to reveal. The hungry ones give themselves away with every word, and he collects their insecurities like data. That's the machinery of presence. Not flash, not noise, but psychological architecture. Every movement calculated, every glance deliberate, every word carrying weight. No wasted gestures, no filler talk, no nervous laughter. Because the more you say, the more you give others to question, challenge, or decode. But when you say less and mean more, you force the room to adjust itself to your rhythm. This is why people fear silence, because in silence there's nowhere to hide. When a man says something final and then says nothing else, everyone around him scrambles to fill the void. But the powerful man lets the silence hang. He doesn't soften it. He doesn't follow it up with a smile or a just kidding. He lets it do what silence does best: create pressure. You must understand this. Every room has a rhythm, and the man who sets it controls the frame. The insecure react to energy. The powerful create it. They don't match volume, they lower it. They don't join chaos, they still it. And when they speak, it's not to join the conversation, it's to end it. So if you want to be remembered, don't try to impress. Command the atmosphere. Walk like the room is already yours. Move slowly. Speak like every sentence is a verdict. And most importantly, don't fill the silence. Let them feel the weight of your presence. Let them wonder what you're thinking. Let them fear what you'll say next. Because when you master presence, you never have to raise your voice again. The most powerful voices in history were never the loudest, they were the most final. The men who truly ruled didn't speak often, but when they did, their words didn't sound like suggestions. They sounded like decisions already made. That's the difference between talking and ruling. One seeks to be heard. The other assumes obedience. To speak like a ruler, you must first destroy the way you've been conditioned to speak. The rising tone at the end of your sentences. That quiet question mark bleeding into your voice. That's not communication. That's submission. It says, I hope I'm allowed to say this. And the world hears it. They hear it in your fillers, in your qualifiers, in every time you say sorry, but, or maybe it's just me, but, or does that make sense? These are escape hatches for the insecure. Burn them. Powerful speech is not a performance. It's a posture. You don't talk to convince people. You talk to calibrate them, to make it clear where you stand and how far they need to rise just to stand beside you. This is why a ruler never floods the air with explanation. He doesn't negotiate reality. He sets it. If someone disagrees, he doesn't debate. He simply says, that's incorrect. And then he moves on, because truth doesn't plead. It commands. If your words are to carry power, your tone must be grounded. Slow down. Lower your pitch. Eliminate nervous energy. Speak like you've already decided, and the world is just catching up. Never rush to fill silence. Never soften your certainty to appear humble. That kind of humility is not virtue, it's camouflage for fear. And fear is something the world hunts without mercy. Here's the paradox: when you speak less, you're heard more. Because in a world drowning in noise, silence is dangerous. People don't fear what they can read. They fear what they can't. And when you speak rarely but with precision, your words begin to carry weight. They echo, they ripple, they redefine the temperature of the room. So speak like this, not to join the conversation but to end it. Not to ask for space but to fill it. Not to argue your worth but to declare it. Your voice is not for decoration, it is a weapon. And like any weapon, it must be clean, deliberate, and used only when necessary. Because when you master the art of speaking like a ruler, you no longer chase respect. You define it. There is no greater form of power than emotional sovereignty. To command rooms, words, and outcomes is one thing, but to command your own reactions, that is the final untouchable form. Most men never reach it. They master their voice, their walk, their posture, but inside they are still owned. Their emotions don't belong to them. They belong to the world. And that world knows exactly where to press. Tell them they're not enough, and they over-explain. Praise them, and they chase. Insult them, and they burn with rage. Pull away from them emotionally, and they beg for closeness. These men are not sovereign. They are programmable. They are puppets whose strings are labeled validation, affection, and acceptance. And once someone figures out which string moves you, you will never be free again. The Machiavellian man understands this. He cannot be moved if he is to move others. So he withdraws his reactions from public view. He doesn't display pain when he's disrespected. He doesn't glow with approval when he's praised. He doesn't spiral when he's ignored. He feels everything but shows nothing unless it serves his strategy. Because if the world can trigger you with a sentence, a glance, or a silence, then you are not powerful, you are exposed. Your mind must become a fortress. Not a hallway where every stranger can wander through rearranging the furniture. Inside that fortress, your emotions are yours, private, measured, weaponized. You don't owe anyone a visible reaction. You don't flinch to prove you're alive. You observe, you absorb. And you act only when the act gives you leverage. This is not coldness. This is clarity. Because emotion is not weakness, but unguarded emotion. That's how the world breaks men. That's how empires fall through leaders who couldn't resist the temptation to lash out, explain themselves, or prove something. But you are becoming different. You are building the ability to feel deeply and still move precisely. You are becoming dangerous not because you hurt others, but because no one can hurt you without your permission. And when others test you, and they will, they'll find nothing to grip. No panic, no performance, no obvious wound to exploit. And in that moment, they'll feel something terrifying, that you are unreachable, that they can't move you, shake you, or access you, that you are governed by nothing but strategy and mission. That's when they stop trying to control you. That's when they realize you are no longer a man responding to the world. You are the one shaping it. Most people treat rejection like it's a wound. They flinch. They shrink. They internalize it as a verdict: I wasn't good enough. But the Machiavellian mind sees rejection not as a verdict, but as intel. When someone rejects you, they aren't defining your value, they're revealing their limitations. They're showing you who they are, what they fear, what they underestimate, and most importantly, what they'll never get to access again. Rejection is not personal. It's positional. It tells you nothing about your worth, but everything about where they stand. They said no because they believed they could survive without you. That's not an insult, it's a map, a signal. And the worst mistake you can make is treating it like a mirror. Because once you see rejection as a reflection of your value, you begin to bend to chase to explain. And that's when you give away your power. A powerful man never reacts to rejection, he repositions. He doesn't spiral, he withdraws. No dramatic exit, no emotional closure, just absence so sharp it echoes. When they expect a wounded ego, give them silence. Let them sit in the void. Let them feel the weight of losing access to something they never truly appreciated. That's how you reverse the polarity. You don't beg to stay. You vanish and evolve. You don't post, "I'm doing better now." You actually do better. You don't try to make them see what they lost. You become so undeniable, so elevated, that they have no choice but to hear about you through whispers they were never meant to catch. Reframe the story. You weren't rejected, you were testing. You weren't chasing, you were observing. And what they failed was not you, but an opportunity to rise. You gave them one chance to recognize power. They failed. And now their access is revoked permanently. But the final move is the most lethal: convert rejection into control. Let it refine your edge. Let it carve away the parts of you that needed applause. Let it harden your presence until no one dares to second-guess your worth again. Rejection clears the fog. It reveals who fears you, who envies you, and who could never handle you. And in that clarity, you sharpen. You rise. You stop knocking on doors and start building gates only a few are allowed through. Because the truth is this: you were never defeated. You were redirected. Pushed not down but inward toward the version of yourself that doesn't ask twice, doesn't wait to be chosen, and doesn't flinch when told no. He simply becomes the man they'll regret losing access to forever. There comes a point in your transformation when the world stops trying to control you, not because it gave up, but because it no longer knows how. You've become unreadable, unreachable, not because you've become cold, but because you've become whole. When you no longer react, when your worth no longer depends on who approves, when your silence carries more weight than others' noise, that's when you stop being just a man and begin to become a myth. Most people are easy to figure out. They wear their desperation on their sleeve. You ignore them and they panic. You praise them and they melt. You reject them and they chase. But when you become emotionally sovereign, when their praise, silence, attention, or rejection no longer moves you, you become the one variable they can't control. And what people can't control, they either fear or obsess over. This is the paradox: when you stop seeking validation, you become the standard. When you stop chasing connection, you become the one worth pursuing. And when your identity is no longer shaped by the room, but instead shapes the room, you become untouchable. Not because you're aggressive, not because you're loud, but because your existence is no longer a reaction to theirs. You don't enter rooms to be seen anymore. You enter them to be felt. Your energy shifts the temperature before you speak. You move like a man who knows he doesn't compete because he's already chosen himself. You don't brag. You don't chase followers. You don't try to inspire. You simply become the kind of man whose discipline speaks louder than any explanation ever could. And when others test you, when they try to provoke you, flatter you, ghost you, tempt you, and nothing works, they feel it. That creeping discomfort of standing next to someone they can't read, can't bend, can't move. That's when the legend begins, because the man they can't move is the one they'll never forget. This is your arrival not as someone who shouts for attention, but as someone who replaces noise with presence. The room shifts because you're in it. The air feels heavier when you look someone in the eye. The silence becomes sharper after you speak, and the people who once overlooked you now wonder how they ever did. You're no longer shaped by others. You shape them. You no longer play the game. You define it. And you no longer need to be understood because you've become the one man they will remember in silence. You were never meant to blend in. You were meant to bend reality, shift atmospheres, walk into a room and change its rhythm not by speaking louder, but by carrying the kind of silence that makes others lower their voice without knowing why. You weren't born to be another man in the crowd. You were built for something colder, sharper, deeper, something unforgettable. This was never about motivation. This wasn't about hype or performance. This was about rebuilding yourself at the root where nobody sees, but everyone eventually feels. Because by now you've realized something undeniable power doesn't belong to the perfect. It belongs to the bold. It belongs to the man who stopped asking for permission, who stopped waiting to be chosen, who burned the script society handed him and rewrote his story in silence. The final transformation is not about posture or speech or how you carry yourself in public. It's about what you carry when no one is watching. It's about becoming so certain in who you are that rejection becomes irrelevant, disrespect becomes data, and approval becomes unnecessary. You're not chasing peace anymore. You're chasing clarity, control, command. And when they see you again, the ones who underestimated you, dismissed you, discarded you, they won't know what to say. Because you won't need to say anything. You'll have become the very thing they can't explain, a man who no longer asks, no longer flinches, no longer breaks when ignored. A man whose absence is louder than others' applause. You now understand rejection was never a wound. It was a filter. Praise was never the goal. It was bait. And silence was never weakness. It was your weapon waiting to be mastered. Now the world feels different because you are different. You don't speak to be accepted. You speak to declare. You don't act to be liked. You act to define. And you don't exist to be understood. You exist to haunt memory, command, respect, and move the pieces without ever showing your hand. You've become the man people study quietly. The one who used to ask, now deciding. The one who used to chase, now being pursued. The one they tried to mold, but who burned their expectations and rose alone. This was never about confidence. This was about dominance, emotional, mental, spiritual. You don't need applause. You don't need revenge. You've become the standard, and they will never forget you, because legends don't explain. They arrive and the world reshapes around them.